The thing that separates good teaching from bad teaching is the awkward pause.
Dun dun dun. Dun dun. Dun dun dun. Boom.
Okay, so always beware of anyone who tries to sell you that one magic bullet that will supposedly fix everything for you. There's so many types of learning objectives, from behaviors to cognition, self-regulation, becoming, identity, engagement, confidence, and so many possible activities to get there that it's a running theme for me whenever I talk to people about what I do and how I teach, to stop them and say, it just depends. What's the purpose and what are the rules and constraints for how I can get my learners to meet that purpose? Because there's really no one single way to get there. But in the case of the awkward pause, it really does have a few magical properties and can really do quite a bit for you because it's working both on the surface and underneath at the paradigm level. So let's get into this. One of the most important ways you can classify teaching is teaching to hear the right answer and teaching to get your students to arrive at the right answer. On the surface, they don't sound very different, but the outcome and the underlying purpose are very different. And one of the interesting ways to tell the difference between these two teaching purposes is the awkward pause. Now, from the outset, I'll reiterate that there's still more out there than just teaching for anything even related to right answers. And that's fine. But for a lot of what we teach, there's still a lot of clear things that we are looking for. And that's what this video focuses on. Teaching to hear the right answer comes back to the idea of the teacher being the source of knowledge in the classroom. Historically, this was very important, and nowadays we refer to this notion with the popular term, sage on the stage. When not everyone had access to books or the internet, or they simply couldn't read, putting someone in the room with all the knowledge becomes extremely important. In modern contexts, you can still find application for sage on the stage teaching in crash courses, introductions, and even intermingling with other types of teaching. The problem, though, with sage on the stage teaching is that just because you're listening to someone share their knowledge with you, doesn't mean you're going to learn it. Or even if you do, there's not much guarantee you'll remember it or know how to use it. And that brings us to the critical difference between these two teaching and learning philosophies. For the sage on the stage, the focus is on the teacher's performance. Some of the worst examples of this are boring teachers who drone on about who knows what.
Anyone?
But there are good examples of this where the teacher is charismatic, entertaining, and well organized. Whether a classroom teacher or a TED Talk, these can be very memorable experiences, but whether you learned or not wasn't the focus. But for the guide on the side, as it's called, everything comes down to whether or not the student learned, whether or not the student can do something with that knowledge by the end of the class, whether it's recalling new terminology, successfully following lab instructions, writing a cohesive paper. These are student-focused activities that depend entirely on whether the student learned or not. Now, one of the easiest ways to make a lecture more effective, in terms of learning, not necessarily entertainment, is to add questions. The idea is that when you ask questions, the students start thinking and mentally engaging with the content. That's the idea anyway, but the fact of the matter is that, as with everything in teaching, it depends. It depends on the purpose of the question as seen in how you actually ask that question. Think back to the teacher on Ferris Bueller's Day Off for a moment. He's teaching an economics lesson, but instead of doing a straight lecture, he pauses to engage with his students. Whenever he gets to key terms, he stops and gives the students a second to fill in the blank for him. It's great because they now have a moment of personal recall. They're accessing their own knowledge rather than just letting it wash over them. But if you've seen the show, you know it's still anything but great. So what went wrong? That pause, that anyone, doesn't really have a question mark at the end of it, just a period. In no way does he honestly expect the students to actually chime in and participate, so much so that in one instance, where he's getting no response, he simplifies things for the students and supplies two possible answers for them to choose from.
The Hawley-Smoot Tariff Act, which anyone raised or lowered, raised tariffs.
So what we have is a sage on the stage with window dressing to make it appear more interactive. But because the intent isn't really there, the actual teaching philosophy shows through and the students aren't fooled one bit. On the other hand, you've got a scene in Stand and Deliver where Jaime Escalante is teaching math with negative numbers. He asks his question, -2 plus 2, just fill the hole. But what's different between him and the economics teacher is that he is relentless in asking his question. He won't give the answer and he just sits there waiting awkwardly until the student answers it for himself. What's important is that it's not accidentally awkward. For Jaime to give the answer would completely defeat his own purpose, which is to get these students to prove they're as good as students at better schools, whereas the point of the Ferris Bueller teacher was to get through the day's material. There's a similar technique known as the pregnant pause that's used to particular effect in the legal world. Being in a situation where you would normally have a dialogue, but the other person is awkwardly not doing any of the talking, can often nudge people into talking more than they normally would to fill that gap. And I imagine some of its effectiveness is due to the person being off kilter in a stressful situation, like interrogations. One of the main differences is that the pregnant pause doesn't require a question to get things started, just the really uncomfortable silence. You can see somewhat of an example of this in The Matrix. Here we've got Agent Smith going through Neo's file, his criminal record. From the moment he walks in until 35 seconds later, that's a long time in a conversation, Smith doesn't say anything. He just slowly and meaningfully looks through that file until Neo gives a slight but noticeable confession. It's not much, but it would be enough to give Smith leverage if this were a normal interrogation in the real world. Since classroom teaching has a different setting and different relationships between the teacher and student than in an interrogation, what exactly is the awkward pause and how can we use it to help students? When I was being trained as a French instructor, I was told to ask my questions to the class, give a few seconds for students to think about the answer, and then call on someone at the end of the few seconds. Qu'est-ce que vous aimez manger pour le dîner? Jessica? In normal situations, you wait maybe a second or two for an answer. Anything beyond that is, well, socially awkward. Hey, Jeff, what are you reading? Jeff? Hello? With normal questions, you probably have some kind of answer ready to go. How do you get to work? What's your favorite color? How was your day? But in teaching, and particularly because teaching is about processing new information and typically more complex thoughts, it takes time to construct an answer or even to at least get started constructing one. When you jump in after just that normal 1 or 2 seconds, you short-circuit that thinking prep time and end up with, I don't know, or maybe you get an answer, but it's going to be something that doesn't show almost any of their potential. That awkward pause is usually just a couple extra seconds beyond the normal couple seconds, but they're critical because of what I call cognitive load and because of working memory. Your working memory is what your students are using to process all the stuff that's being thrown at them, and it has a very, very finite capacity. Most of what you navigate on a daily basis consists of things you've encountered before in some fashion. You've built up automatic responses that you don't have to think about, keeping your cognitive load low. And you apply those automatic responses to slightly new situations so they don't take long to think about. But in the classroom, most everything you're throwing at the students is new, sometimes completely new. This takes up a lot of processing power and therefore more time. High cognitive load. They can't draw from as many automatic responses because, after all, they're in the class to build up their information and create more of those automatic, prepared thoughts. This gets especially important when working with a foreign language. The reason it's different from other subjects is that when learning a foreign language, in most modern classrooms, at least college classrooms, the medium is the content. When you're in a history or math class, everything is delivered to the students in their native language, or at least one that they've proven themselves highly proficient in. So it's an easy channel to send information through. All they have to process is the stuff that they're learning. But in a foreign language, a lot of their working memory is taken up trying to process the very sounds coming out of your mouth or the new combination of letters on the page, meaning that the channel itself and everything flowing through it are now new and have to be learned and processed at the same time. Multiply this by a bit when working with languages with a different alphabet or no alphabet at all. That doesn't leave much room to actually process the questions you're asking. So that short circuit or that skip to quitting will happen a lot more easily. And while a few extra seconds may not make them instantly proficient, it could be just enough to get them started in formulating an answer. But not only that, an awkward pause plays a social and motivational role in class. It proves to the students that they are actually expected to answer, that the point isn't the teacher's presentational performance, or that participation is just a perfunctory act. It's a salient, if small, social cue that says, we're not moving on until you get a chance to do some work. And that's what it's really all about, isn't it? To really learn something, students need to be given a challenge to work on, not just access and regurgitate. Something that requires them to put forth a real effort, but on a task that they're able to succeed at. And a simple, awkward pause, it doesn't change the nature of the task, but it does change the approach to the task, moving it a little more within their grasp. So, what do you think? Thanks for watching. Let me know in the comments section what you do to help your students think about questions before they respond, or any funny stories about awkward pauses when you've taught. And be sure to hit both the like and subscribe buttons if you'd like to see Critical Hit teach or keep growing and improving. See you in the next video. Think about questions before they... Like, subscribe, awkward, awkward.